Hi Sam.
Hiya, how's it going?
Yeah, good, thanks. So we're here today to talk about your success with your Part 3 um, test, which was done a few months ago now, wasn't it?
Yeah, about 3-4 months ago now.
You've been such a busy man that we've not been able to get hold of you to have this podcast. But thank you for coming along today to share your experiences. And as I always say at the beginning of these podcasts, as I introduce these, this is for the benefit of those that might be going through the process on their Part 3 or their standards check currently. And hopefully you might be able to share those experiences that will help them go through that process confidently. So just to start off with, just for our listeners, how long did the training process take for you?
So my training process was a little bit longer than most because I'd started during COVID, but I had the advantage of doing my training whilst I wasn't actually on the road. So I was able to come into the office and benefit from all three of the trainers that NextGen had at the time, as well as doing sit-ins with other PDIs and watching how they were being taught. So I actually really enjoyed my training time. I managed to benefit a lot from just sitting back and watching the instructor trainers train others as well. So I was able to grow in a way that most probably wouldn't have been able to. I've actually had, I think, 3-4 training licenses due to the COVID knocking that back. I was able to get a few because I was unable to get my Part 3 tests in time, and they kept on getting cancelled by the DVSA, so they extended my licence more again than most people probably would have had the opportunity to have.
And I know you don't necessarily have to go on a trainee licence. Did you find that beneficial?
Yeah, massively beneficial, because you get to actually learn the job and grow as an instructor before you actually have to take that test. I feel that if you go in blind into that test, you're going to really struggle because you don't get a feel for the questions you have to ask, the things that you're likely to see on the test, which is a complete unknown until you get there.
So, in terms of preparation for your Part 3 then, you completed your 40 hours, you've done your 20 hours mandatory training whilst you were on your trainee licence. What did you do to prepare for your Part 3?
To be honest, I actively asked everyone and anyone I could for advice on how they dealt with theirs. I scouted my area as much as possible to look for areas which my students that were suitable at the time could actually learn and progress from. I spoke to my instructor trainer at the time, Dawn, regularly on the phone, to the point where I probably got a bit annoying for her, but she went above and beyond to really sort of help and drive home the fact that I would be okay, and I had to just believe more in myself and I didn't actually need the level of training that I probably asked for. But other than that, I just taught. I went out and I worked on my students. I made sure that I recorded myself so I could reflect. I did a lot of reflective logs, so I was writing down every time I felt that a lesson went particularly badly and saw if there was a trend. And when there was a trend, I tried to eradicate what I had already done there to make it better for my students. But ultimately, that stuff really didn't come into the Part 3 test.
Okay, yeah, certainly from what you were saying, from a trainer's point of view, I see that, using that trainee licence as it's supposed to be used for, as you've said, using it to reflect on your performance and what you can learn and set goals and identify needs, certainly will help, hopefully, our listeners get through this process a little bit easier. Would you agree?
Yes, I completely agree with that.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Part 3 then. So what did you choose and why?
So my Part 3 was originally supposed to be a roundabout lesson because that particular student was really struggling with judgment at roundabouts. So she would arrive at a roundabout and stop every single time, regardless of if it was safe to move on or not. Ultimately, that changed before we even got to a roundabout, so I had to adapt to the lesson very early on. And she kind of crumbled under the pressure of being examined, even though it wasn't her that was being watched, and she needed a hell of a lot of support throughout the whole lesson itself. She also managed to drop on both me and the examiner that she was 7 months pregnant, and the stress then sort of overwhelmed her. So we had to adapt to the lesson maybe 3 or 4 times in the space of less than half an hour to kind of make sure that her learning goals and needs were kind of met, at the same time as making sure that her mental state was kept and she felt comfortable in the lesson. She finished the lesson and everything went really well. She did end up in tears during the lesson, which was unfortunate, but we managed to comfort her and make sure that by the end of it she felt okay and she was happy with what happened. But mainly it revolved around making sure she was supported and happy, more so than what the lesson actually, how it developed, because it went from a roundabout lesson to a junction lesson, and we focused on MSPSL because that's what she could deal with at that time.
Good. So I think the main thing to take from that is what you're saying to our listeners is it's about being adaptable to your pupils' needs, and those needs aren't always about the skill involved in the topic they're doing at the time. As you said, your pupil became quite overwhelmed with the situation, and you were able to put what she was doing aside and make sure that she was okay within herself.
Yes.
And I think the feedback that you got from the examiner at the time, because I was present, kind of reiterated that, didn't it?
It did, yes.
Because I think the emphasis for a lot of people going through this process and why people are unsuccessful is that they maintain to be goal focused, and anything outside of that goal, if they don't tend to deal with those things, notice the body language, maybe the verbals, and they concentrate with just doing, for example, if you would just do the roundabout, they then become unsuccessful at that part 3. The feedback that you got from the examiner at the end, was there anything that you can recall from the examiner that you would say would be good advice, or anything that you would highlight to anyone listening to this podcast at the moment?
I would say that he said that it's you've got to actively listen and watch what your students are doing. It's not about badgering your students, but if you adapt when they need you to adapt, and as many times as you need to adapt, you probably won't have any issues with part 3. But if you're not listening to and watching the cues that your student gives you, then you're never going to pick up on that. So you've got to be observant. During your part 3 or your standard straight, you're probably going to talk a lot more than what you're expecting to do. But ultimately, the biggest piece of advice he said to me was, pick a student that's going to make you work. Don't pick someone you think is going to sort of, okay, we can do a lesson and it's just going to sail through, because you're not showing any kind of development. And that kind of is ultimately what my examiner wanted to see, because he said that I had worked so much during that short amount of time that he didn't feel that at any point it was going to be a fail, and I thought it was a complete disaster.
Yeah, I know, because I was present at the end of your test, and I know when we both spoke at the end, you thought that was unsuccessful, didn't you, to be honest?
Yeah, I walked over almost in tears saying, yeah, that's that done. And
yeah,
that was
and obviously from the feedback that you gave me, I thought, well, sounds like you've done a really good job to me, and I know when I turned up, you were still helping your pupil out at the test centre with her control, because she was struggling with, at this particular test centre there's a bit of a ramp to get out, and the vision is a bit obstructed to the left, and it's a very difficult junction, and her control, I could see her clutch control wasn't particularly good, but you gave her the opportunity on several occasions whilst I was still there for her to get this, didn't you?
Yeah, we restarted the lesson I think 4 times. So there is a tiny hill start at my test centre, and she rolled back down it, and it wasn't something she had done previously, but with the added weight of someone else in the back, which she wasn't used to, I thought it was a good opportunity for her to actually practice that before we went and did the lesson that we had planned, because there was a need there. So we adapted the lesson at the start to make sure that she was comfortable before she moved on. But as soon as she was able to do it, we then made an agreement to move the lesson forward and then go and do what we had agreed to do. And then we adapted the lesson about 2 minutes later again.
So did you actually get to the actual lesson that you'd agreed at the beginning?
No.
You didn't get to that lesson
Not
at all?
Not at all. We got about 3 roads away from the test centre before we adapted, and because of how upset she had got because she felt that she was costing me a test, I had to reassure her that it wasn't about her, it was about me, that if she felt that upset, that I was willing to write the test off and go and drop the examiner off and make sure that she was better suited to what we were doing and that her mental state was more important. And at the end, the examiner noted and made comment that just by saying that could have pushed my score up a little bit.
Absolutely, because that in itself is being client-centred, isn't it? It's about actively listening, watching your pupils and reacting to how they are with us at that time. And yes, being there present in that debrief, that's exactly what the examiner said. He said the one thing I wish for is that all PDIs and ADIs, when they do these assessments, they just be themselves and do what they do normally, because from an examiner's point of view, I think he was saying that he sees too many people trying to do something that's not what they would do normally. And I know certain examiners will write down on the test papers pre-planned lesson, and what they mean by that is that the instructor does the goal and is so goal focused, everything outside of that goal is missed, therefore it's in their mind pre-planned.
Yes, I've had that written twice on my other lessons, and I couldn't understand what it was until I went through this time. And me and this particular examiner have not always seen eye to eye, but at the end of it, he certainly become a lot more human to me. I don't know if you felt the same way, but it was a different kind of side of him that I saw. We even got a little fist bump at the end, which was strange, but he gave some really strong feedback, and I was over the moon with the result that I got. When considering I thought I had completely ruined the test. So it just goes to show that what you think that they're looking for, and I believe he said this as well, isn't what they're looking for. So as long as you are actively looking to teach your student at a level that they're ready for, and you change the lesson to suit what their learning goals and needs are, you will be successful. But if you just stick to what your plan is, that's not client-centered, so you won't be successful.
So what would be the most, or the advice that you would give any ADI or PDI that might be listening to this podcast, who might be coming for their part 3? What's the top bit of advice to give them right now?
The best piece of advice I could give is don't dodge your training. Your trainers are there to actually help you develop, and if you're not utilising what they're trying to offer you, then you don't really stand that much of a chance of getting through it. So this isn't an easy process to get through, and you've got ready-made trainers waiting to help you and coach you through this. Don't try and do it alone. Ask for advice from other instructors, but please be adaptable. Make sure that you're not sticking to what you want to do. You're actually listening to your students and the trainers. It's all well and good coming in and doing your training sessions, but you've got to take that away and actually work on it.
Yeah. And I think you'd probably agree, as most people have, that old saying, see it, say it, sort it.
Yes.
You know, don't hold back. You've got to help them, haven't you, at the end of the day? That's what we're there for, to give them value for money. We've got to help them. And by helping them, we can demonstrate learners taking place. Wouldn't you agree?
I would 100% agree with that. I didn't realise how much CSA sorted would be needed until that lesson, but it was constant. But if you're doing your lessons effectively, it should be.
Yeah. You took control of the situation, which was really good. And just to highlight this to our listeners, there are some very good lessons being conducted out there, and those that have been unsuccessful, in my experience, have narrowly missed success purely on the basis that their misunderstanding of what client-centered means. Sometimes people think it's all about questioning the pupil to be a good. That's a good technique and that's a good skill to be a good coach. But certainly from your experience, I think you took control of the situation and then was the coach afterwards once you took that control. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. Sometimes you don't have an option. You kind of have to jump in and make sure that you're in control of the vehicle, because ultimately that person that you're teaching might not have a license, and they might be scared and you won't know. And if you leave it too long, then that's when accidents can happen. But if you take control early, you can always then coach afterwards and reassure them and reaffirm the knowledge is there.
Yeah, good. Great. No, I appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully our listeners will be able to take something from this podcast and go forward and with confidence and pass that part 3.
I hope so.
So once again, thanks very much, Sam.
Thank you very much.